this is Ebonee's Creativity. Thank you so much for joining me here on my channel. In today's video, I am introducing you to my newest and cutest family member, and that is our new fur baby, Ralph. So I am flipping a piece of furniture for him to turn into his new crate because we do want to crate train. We will be making an old project over again into something brand new and special for him. So thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Stay tuned to the very end of the video for some super cute puppy footage, and let's hop right on into the flip. Here is today's project, and you may notice it from a previous project I've done here on the channel. So if you haven't seen its first makeover, go ahead and check that out. I will link it below. As always, we are going to start out with a good sanding, and I am using 220 grit sandpaper. When I made this over the first time, I did top coat it, and so my goal with this round of scuff sanding is not to remove the color, but I just want to remove the previous layers of top coat that I applied. I'm not worried about removing the color because I know this was painted with fusion paint because I painted it, and I'm going to be repainting with the fusion paint as well. So I know that these paints will play nicely together, and I'm not really too concerned about just painting right over this. Up next, I'm going to use my jigsaw to remove this bottom piece of trim. Honestly, I thought that once I cut both sides that this piece would get really shaky and it would be easy for me to detach it, but it was still on there pretty well. So I went ahead and hit this with a hammer to remove it. Then I discovered that there were some hidden screws that were holding this piece in place. As for this top piece of trim, I didn't want to eliminate it completely, but I did want to modify it and kind of take the curvy edge away and make it a little bit more modern by squaring it off. So I did that using a piece of tape as my guide and cutting with my jigsaw along the edge of the tape. This piece was also held on by some hidden screws, so I also ended up using a hammer to help me get rid of the excess here. When I hit those pieces with the hammers, the hidden screws were still kind of sticking out, and so to eliminate those, I just sawed them off with my Dremel tool. So now we have a few repairs to make, and I'm going to be doing so using quick wood. I did make a few dings in this with the Dremel while I was attempting to get the screws out, and I also made a few dings when I removed those pieces by force with the hammer. So then I'm just going to be letting the quick wood dry and then sanding everything down. Since this will be a home for a very small puppy who is doing crate training, containment is key. So I wanted to make sure that I added some doors for this purpose. Here I am on my saw, just cutting out some plyboard to make doors with. Here is what I came up with, and I will need 2 of these, so I'm just going to trace this first one out and make another one. At first I was going to make like a barn style door, which would be more closed in, but then I started to think it's a puppy, like he's very used to being around people at this point, and so I'm going to go ahead and give him more of a visual scope than the barn door would allow. So then I decided just to cut the interior of the door out, and then I would come up with some kind of way to actually have the door contain him while still allowing him to see out. So I did change my idea on this kind of midway through, but I did want to make sure what I'd done already would fit. And while I was brainstorming new ideas, I kind of went ahead and just moved on to something else. I knew I needed to re-secure this top piece here because I had removed the screws that were holding it in. So I just went in with my nail gun to add a few brad nails in here just to make sure that this piece was no longer shaky. At this point, I've come up with the backup idea. I'm going to hollow out the center of this door. So I am just measuring to make sure that I can get an even rectangle out of the center of this. I'm starting out by drilling a couple of pilot holes, which will allow me to get my jigsaw blade into the center of this piece of wood so that I can cut out the center part. Then I'm going to go ahead and go in with my jigsaw and just kind of Use the tape as my guide again and go from pilot hole to pilot hole until the entire center of this door is removed. Up next, I am going to take my simple green and just wipe everything down. Next, I'm going to go in with some Ben primer and a foam brush, and I'm just going to be priming the areas that were exposed when I removed those trim pieces and the areas that I patched up with Quick Wood. I'm also priming the doors since they have not been primed before. I want to make sure that they take the paint the same as the rest of the piece does, so I'm just going to go ahead and prime those as well. Now I am ready to paint, so I'm going to be using this coal black and my Old Faithful paintbrush. Sorry, I'm kind of blocking your view here a little bit, but I started painting on the inside. I basically just left this clip in to show you the order in which I'm painting this. So I'm working my way from the inside out. As always, I want to point out that Fusion is not a one coat coverage paint, so I will be doing 2 coats of this, 2 full coats, and then also I'll be doing kind of what I call a water coat or half coat, which is mostly water and just a little bit of paint just to smooth out all my strokes. I always paint this paint with my strokes going in one direction, and I try not to overwork it. Now that the primer is dry on the doors, I did move on to painting those as well. Once all that was dry, I was able to apply these hinges. I started out by measuring where I wanted it to be, pre-drilling some holes, and then I was able to use the screws that came with the hinge to attach it to the door. And as you can see, I did apply 2 hinges to each door. Then I pre-drilled some holes to attach the hinges to the actual body of the piece. And up next, I'm blocking a little bit again, sorry about that, but I did use the screws that came with the hinges to secure the doors onto the body of this piece. Once I did that, the hinges were working fine, and this was almost perfect, except the gap that the hinges created caused the doors to overlap, so off camera I did shave down one door. Here's the solution to the problem I was having earlier with wanting the puppy to be able to still see out. So I'm going to be using this aluminum sheet and these shears, and I'm just going to cut a piece to fit the opening in the door. This will allow him to see out, allow me to see in, allow for a better flow of air, and I think it's just a better option than the more closed off option I was going to go with at first. So to secure this, I'm just going to be using a staple gun for now, just to hold this in place. If you have been watching me for any length of time, you will know that my skills with the jigsaw are not the best, but I have gotten better and I have learned when to stop. So since my door holes are not perfect, I'm going to be using this trim to mask that. I'm using my Dremel tool just to cut out a few pieces to trim out the door. I found 2 1/4-inch pieces of wood in my stash as well as 2 stir sticks from Home Depot. So I decided I wasn't going to be buying any wood when they gave it to me for free. So I just used all 4 of those pieces that I found to trim out the back side of the door just so that none of the sharp edges of the aluminum sheet would be exposed. I also added a little hot glue to the tips of the trim pieces just to make sure that those did not pop out. Then I added some caulk just to make sure that the trim and the door frame edge was seamless. After pushing the caulk into the gaps with my finger, then I went ahead and started to clean up the excess caulk. I had some extra trim pieces, and once I looked in the back of this, I'm like, man, he's pretty small. He can probably squeeze out. So I just added some trim pieces just as extra security to keep him contained. Once I determined the correct size of those pieces, I popped them back out to stain them. I'm using the same stain that I used on the top, which is Briar Smoke by Verithane. Now I'm just doing some touch-up painting just to kind of cover up that caulk and make sure that my line around the door is tight to the line around the trim. Up next, I'll be painting the back sides of the door just to make sure everything looks cohesive and nice. And then I'll be staining that trim around the front of the door. Just because I'm extra, I popped over to my Cricut and printed out his name to put on the top. Next, I'm going in with my Fusion Wipe-On Poly. I'm going to roll it to mix all the ingredients together. You would never want to shake this because it will create bubbles that will appear in your final product. I'm going to pour some onto a dampened Dollar Tree sponge and then simply rub it on. Here's a little footage of me installing the latch. And here is his very first time in his new habitat. I put some treats in just to entice him to enter it. He was a little skeptical at first, but after we added some treats and some toys, he made himself right at home. So here are the final images. And here is some super cute puppy footage. Thank you so much for watching. Please do not forget to thumbs up the video if you enjoyed it at any point. Leave a comment letting me know what you think about my new baby or the project. And thank you so much for watching. I will see you guys in my next flip.